Hello, and welcome back to the Dumb Defenses podcast, where we go around the world and through time to bring you the weirdest legal cases we can find. I'm Frankie.
I'm Judah.
And today we are diving into A Tale of Two Bundys.
Got nothing but Bundys.
Actually, more than that, because my guy's got family.
Yeah, you got a lot of Bundys. I just got the one Bundy. But my Bundy, I don't think your Bundys ever killed anybody.
No, in fact, the police actually killed one of the protesters that was alongside him at one point.
Okay,
anyways, spoiler alert.
We are both organ transplants. I remember when your standoff happened.
Yes, and there's actually two. So let's dive into it. Ammon Bundy, just as a introduction to him, is an anti-government activist, as was his father, Cliven. Such interesting names in this family. In 2014, Cliven Bundy had been in a legal dispute for 21 years with the Bureau of Land Management, which had gotten court authorization to collect over $1 million in back grazing fees for Cliven's cattle. So he had several head of cattle who for like 21 years had been grazing on public lands because reasons. And the government was like, no, you have to pay us. So he would graze these cattle on the federal land that was adjacent to his property in Bunkerville, Nevada. And beginning on March 27th of 2014, the BLM began cordoning off the federal land to capture and remove all of the cattle. And the roundup of the livestock began on April 5th. People were upset about this, started protesting. On April 9th, Ammon got involved. He drove an ATV in front of a BLM vehicle, preventing it from leaving. The officers repeatedly asked him to back up, and when he wouldn't, they threatened to tase him. And he still
As much as I don't like this guy, not an appropriate use of a taser.
It's almost never an appropriate use of a taser, in my opinion, because it's so damaging to your body. But anyways, they threatened to tase him. He wouldn't move his ATV. An officer and a canine approached him, and he repeatedly kicked the canine.
Kick
the dog. So for people who haven't actually seen a canine unit in action, these dogs are very highly trained, and they're either trained to be drug detection, they're trained to be like crowd dispersal, or to find suspects and track them down and essentially take them down. And so this dog was probably standing at the edge of the leash barking at him, right? Because they're trained to first bark to scare, and then if they're given a command, the dog will go and take the person down. So the dog's standing there barking at him. He starts kicking the dog repeatedly, at which point they did, in fact, tase him. However, he tore the probes out and continued to advance towards the officers. This guy has some sort of, like, He-Man complex or something. They tased him again, and at this point were able to subdue him. He also later on admitted that he had climbed up into a dump truck he thought his father's cattle had been rounded up in. With all this going on, protesters were starting to come in from, like, the Oath Keepers and stuff.
Describe to me, I know what the Oath Keepers are.
So they're a far-right militant group. They were one of the key groups that did, like, the January 6th insurrection to reclaim the election that they had been lied to and told was stolen. Very, very right-wing, very, very racist, sexist, all sort of ists.
What? I can't believe you're telling me this about this group. Are they also homophobic?
Oh yeah, all of the isms. Anyways, all these protesters show up the following day, and he actually asked them to leave their firearms in their vehicles and to not talk to the press, which frankly is a smart move. No firearms means there's no reason for anybody to use deadly force against them, and not talking to the press is a way to not instigate stuff. So, out of a bunch of dumb moves, that was actually relatively good. There were specific guidelines about where they could go, where they couldn't go. He then told the press that he would only leave the property if he got an order from a Nevada court, as he believed that the federal courts did not have jurisdiction over this land.
And I cannot wait to dig into sovereign citizenship with you.
Yep, that'll be next week. So he believes that the land is owned by the sovereign state of Nevada, and that essentially any federal land is owned by the state and not by the feds. He does not believe that federal courts have jurisdiction over him because he's a citizen of the sovereign state of Nevada and not the territory of Nevada, which is what he would call it if it were like part of a larger United States.
Let's pause here and talk about the two different camps that hate and don't listen to the federal government. One is super right-wing, and the other one is super left-wing.
So, have you heard of the horseshoe theory of politics?
No.
So politics is not actually like a line. It's more of a horseshoe. And as you get to the top of the horseshoe, so the far right or the far left, they actually start to get close to each other again.
Because the far left is also extremely into gun rights, self-protection, anti-authoritarian for different purposes. I like that horseshoe theory.
When you get towards the left end of it, it becomes more like homesteading and stuff like that, versus on the right end, it becomes more like militia.
Compounds.
Which, I mean, I guess are two sides of the same coin, homesteading and compounds.
Well, if you're talking about a horseshoe where they almost touch, but those two people wouldn't get along.
No, they wouldn't. Because they are very, very different politically minded.
Yeah, there'd be explosive violence.
Bundy and his family believed that the feds didn't have any rights over the sovereign states. On April 12th, which was a few days after Ammon had got on his little ATV and got himself tased. By that point, the BLM had 400 of Cliven Bundy's cattle corralled.
And if you're thinking about, so I was raised on a farm. I grew up on a farm. We didn't have cows. We didn't have cattle. A lot of my neighbors did. If you're thinking conservatively, each of those is worth $2,000, which is on the very low end. We're talking about $800,000 worth of assets.
It's also just a huge amount of animals, like 400 head of cattle. I don't know if anybody listening has actually been up next to a cow. They are huge. They're very skittish for how large they are, but they are gigantic animals.
They come up to my shoulder. I don't know. I like cows.
I like them too. It's just we had some grass on the inside of our fence at one point when we lived down in Roseburg. We had a cattle ranch on our backyard. It was clearly trying to eat the grass inside the fence, and I picked it up and went to hand it to her, and she was like, "Holy shit, what are you gonna do to me?" And I was like,
yeah, they're prey animals.
The grass that you wanted here. Also, their tongues feel very strange when they're still attached to the cow.
And they taste very delicious when they're in a taco.
Yeah. So 400 head of cattle have been rounded up by BLM. Cliven Bundy ordered the sheriff of Clark County, Nevada, to confront the federal agents. And when the sheriff did not do so, he was reportedly very disappointed.
So sovereign citizens also usually only respect the sheriff. Like,
yeah, it's weird. It's weird. Like, that's like the one authority that they respect, but then the sheriff's like, "I'm gonna do my job, leave me alone," and they're like, "Oh,
I'm not gonna go try and confiscate 400 cows from the federal government."
Right. At this point, Ammon Bundy and about 400 protesters formed a human barricade in front of where all the cows were, leaving 50 officers severely outnumbered. They attempted to order the protesters to disperse, but gunmen arrived. They went and got their guns out of their cars, and the officers wound up retreating. The whole incident became known as the Battle of Bunkerville. Yes, trying to invoke the Battle of Bunker Hill. With all of this happening, clearly there's going to be some criminal charges coming. Ammon and Cliven Bundy, I love these names. Where did they come up with them? Anyways, they were both charged in federal court with 16 felony counts. So there was one count of conspiracy to commit an offense against the United States, one count of conspiracy to injure or impede a federal officer, 4 counts of using and carrying a firearm in relation to a crime of violence, 2 counts of assault on a federal officer, 2 counts of threatening a federal law enforcement officer, 3 counts of obstruction of the due administration of justice, and 2 counts of interference with interstate commerce by extortion. Which is funny because when we dig into the sovereign citizen thing, interstate commerce becomes a big thing. Like the Commerce Clause of the Constitution becomes like really important. So I just found it a little beautiful bite of irony that they were charged with interfering with interstate commerce. So we will, for the moment, put a pin in the 2014 case, because chronologically that's what happened, and move on to the 2016 case. And this is the one that actually happened in Oregon.
Malheur County, it's beautiful. It's desert, a lot of it.
It is what is called a frontier county. There are counties in Oregon that are so rural, they are not called rural, they are called frontier.
There are counties in Oregon that 3 counties share 1 judge.
This is true, and Eastern Oregon is part of that.
I think Sherman County has like 2,500 people in it.
Yeah, it's super small. But like size mass, it's huge.
Yeah.
Like this is literally a situation where like there might be more cows than people.
There's no question. There is more cows than people.
Moving on to 2016, prior to this whole thing blowing up with Ammon and his, several hundred closest buddies, Dwight and Steve Hammond had been found guilty on 2 counts of arson on federal land after a trip up and back from the Ninth Circuit. So essentially, they were convicted. They appealed. Because it was arson on federal land, it was automatically in federal court. They appealed up to the Ninth Circuit, which covers Washington, Oregon, California, Alaska, and Hawaii, I think. After it came back down from the Ninth Circuit, they were out of custody pending appeal, and they were going to be resentenced. This whole thing, because it was arson on federal land, and Ammon Bundy has a hard-on for the feds trying to claim land, he and his brother Ryan got super interested in this case. The Hammond brothers did not want their help. Regardless, because, who actually listens to people other than themselves? Ammon Bundy and his associate Ryan Payne met with the Harney County Sheriff, trying to prevent the Hammond brothers from being imprisoned.
And Harney is next to Malheur. It's one of those other ones, very sparsely populated. There are areas you can drive 30 miles and not see anything. Not see anything, not see a single person.
When the sheriff informed them that he did not have the authority to not imprison them because their case had gone up to the Court of Appeals and come back, Bundy and Payne started becoming threatening. Payne threatened to do the sheriff's job for him, even though the sheriff was trying to do his job, and essentially warned the sheriff that Payne, would not be able to control what a militia might do if this didn't happen the way he wanted it to. So, all sorts of threatening law enforcement, which is such a good idea. Sarcasm. Anyways, he and Bundy moved to Burns in late 2015, along with many members of militia groups. Burns would be the big city closest to where this all went down.
And Burns is not that big.
No, it's really not. You could sneeze and you miss it. On January 2nd of 2016, 300 people met in the Safeway parking lot in Burns.
That's the whole Safeway parking lot in Burns.
It's like the entire Safeway parking lot. There were speeches, there was a rally, and then they marched to the Hammond brothers' home, stopping at the sheriff's on the way, and then they marched back before kind of breaking up. So it was just kind of like a rally and a march and bringing attention to this thing. Bundy, however, at that point, as people were breaking up, announced that he would occupy the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge.
Sure.
To the point that he contacted the sheriff's office and a utility company with the intention of taking over the electric and other utility bills of the refuge.
Sure, why not? I mean, if you're going to be there, you might as well pay the electric bill.
Right? Be responsible. He led his armed occupation of the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge beginning on January 2nd, indicating that it would be a lengthy stay. No employees were at the refuge when Bundy and his group took over, and his dad was not involved, and his dad said, "This was not exactly what I thought should happen." So despite all of the everything that happened 2 years ago with Daddy's permission, now Dad's like, ugh.
Malheur National Wildlife Refuge pretty much is just fanatic bird watchers that go out there. It's got some great birding. It's 143 square miles of mostly desert and scrub brush.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And
But there's like a information building, and that's what they were taking over.
yes, they took over the information. But I just want to say, like, I know quite a few passionate birders. I myself am not a passionate birder, but I admire them. They were the most pissed. We should have let the birders loose on these people because they're like, this is a very important place to watch birds, migrating birds. It's a very important migratory bird thing. Any birders listening are going to be very frustrated with me. And so we had 10,000 upset bird nerds that we should, like, you also go there. It would have been over.
Yeah. Essentially, the protesters were putting forth their view that all federal land needs to be turned over to sovereign states, just like last time, especially any land managed by the Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services, and the United States Forest Service.
That's most of them.
That's most of them. They were also trying to vindicate the Hammonds, who, again, didn't want their help. Bundy said that his goal was to get the economics here in the country revived vis-a-vis logging and outdoor recreation.
There's not trees out there.
There's not trees out there. Also, like, the logging industry has been kind of dying over the last several decades, in part just because they've been logging too much. My ex is a native Oregonian, and he would tell me that when he was a kid, the log trucks would be filled with like 1 or 2 gargantuan logs. And now you see log trucks driving around and it's full of sticks. So logging is not coming back.
And we both lived in an area that used to be a major logging hub, and the logging industry was devastated. And so the entire area that we lived in, Douglas County, Oregon, was economically devastated by the logging industry collapse. Yep. And there was some industry there. I think another...
There were 2 mills, I think, that were open.
I think there's only 1 mill left.
Yeah, I think Keller Lumber's the only one that's still open.
And it's coming back to life as an area that, since people aren't logging it, is ecotourism.
Yep.
Is becoming really huge there. A lot of camping.
It's beautiful. There's a lot of really gorgeous campgrounds and hiking places and things like that. It's just, not safe to live there if you're queer. So.
And it was difficult because you and I both worked with a lot of people and a lot of families that used to have regular, stable income. And when the logging industry collapsed and the economy collapsed, then their lives collapsed and they're trying to make do and stay in this area. And so there was a tremendous drug and alcohol abuse problem.
Yeah, first or second in the state for meth use and opiate use, which is weird to see both. Usually it's one or the other, but when you're in a huge economic depression, there's nothing better to do.
Yes.
So, it was through this whole thing, this protest, this occupation, that Citizens for Constitutional Freedom was born. That is another Oath Keepers type organization that we will likely dig into next week.
And people who don't understand the Constitution, let's move forward.
Yes. So this went on for 41 days, and day by day there were updates. Starting on January 4th, when the Hammonds peacefully surrendered themselves to serve their sentence, because again, they did not want this help. That same day, the sheriff asked the protesters to leave, but they declined because they didn't believe the sheriff spoke on behalf of the people. We'll come back to that in a few days. On the 7th, the sheriff met with Bundy and Payne and again offered for a peaceful resolution, and Bundy said not until the federal lands were turned over to the people. Over the course of this time, various protesters came and went. On January 11th, the protesters took down a portion of the fence between the refuge and an adjoining ranch to allow them access. The adjoining ranch didn't want said access and repaired the fence.
They're like, this is our ranch. We actually own this. This is our private property.
It was more that they were trying to let the ranch owners have part of the refuge. And the ranchers were like,
you took down our fence.
No.
Do you know how long it took us? Yeah. I've fenced before. I've done fencing for sheep.
Yes, you have.
And it is a never-ending process.
Yeah.
And cattle are even worse. You need a...
Because cattle are dumb. They'll just walk through fence.
Sheep are so stupid. Sheep are the dumbest. Yeah. But cattle, when they get spooked, they'll flower it through a fence and they'll put themselves in danger. So just imagine these ranchers who are like, do you know how long it took me to put that fence up? Do you know how much that fencing material cost me? And because of you dumbasses, I have to repair this huge stretch of fence.
Yep. So the next day, January 12th, a computer shop repair owner and self-proclaimed judge, this is another thing that sovereign citizens do, named Bruce Dulcet, said he would hold a grand jury to charge government officials with various crimes.
I declare bankruptcy.
A Harney County judge, the sheriff, and other county officials were soon served with fraudulent documents. Because that's what they do. On January 14th, Bundy announced a longer stay and reached out to nearby sheriffs for support. On January 15th, one of the militants was arrested for stealing one of the federal vehicles and driving it to Safeway.
I didn't know that they had stolen a federal vehicle.
Because dude needed to do a grocery run, apparently. On January 16th, they started vandalizing the building. They were, like, digging trenches and shit in the outside and putting up bunkers and all sorts of stuff. On January 19th, Bundy appeared unannounced at a community meeting in Burns. He didn't say anything, but he heard people talking about wanting the occupation to end. So this whole thing about, like, I don't believe that you talk for the people, like, yeah, he fucking does. They want this to stop. On January 21st, Bundy met with the FBI to negotiate turning the refuge back over to the feds and releasing the Hammonds. He agreed to meet with them again the next day, but the FBI refused to negotiate in front of the media.
Just once again, the Hammonds did not want any of this to happen.
No, the Hammonds had turned themselves in. They were, I mean, happily is probably a stretch, but they were willfully and understandingly serving their prison sentence because they were done. Ultimately, Bundy was peacefully arrested on January 26th when he was pulled over by the FBI and Oregon State Police. He was leaving John Day on the way to a speaking engagement. He and others in his vehicle were arrested. Another car fled the scene, and ultimately OSP shot and killed the driver. The occupation was ongoing, and it finally ended on February 11th after a total of 41 days. So like I said, none of Bundy's people shot anybody, but one of the protesters did wind up getting shot and killed by police. There was a pre-trial release hearing in front of the federal magistrate judge, and Bundy explained that his only goal from the beginning was to protect freedom for the people. He was denied pretrial release, and the court said it would not release him until the occupation ended. So there was 15 or so days from when he was arrested to when it actually ended that the court was not even going to consider releasing him. He offered to plead to a single count of conspiracy in exchange for dropping the rest of his charges and the charges against all the other militants and letting them leave peacefully, which the prosecutors rejected because, like, that would not happen in any prosecutor's office. Bundy later urged the rest of the militants to leave the refuge peacefully, and he said jail was the most difficult thing he's ever done. Little tiny violin. Little tiny violin.
Okay, so let's pause and recognize. So Ammon's got his brother Ryan Bundy,
Mm-hmm.
and Ryan Bundy was represented by one of the all-time Oregon badass attorneys in this case about the wildlife refuge standoff.
Yeah, I'm gonna get to the attorneys were interesting. They had some of their own issues.
Well, Lisa Ludwig.
Oh yeah, Lisa Ludwig. Yeah, she is still a heavy hitter of the public defense world.
Yeah, Lisa Ludwig is a complete badass.
Yeah, actually saw her present over the weekend.
Yeah, it is kind. I don't know. I would say kind of like regionally famous among lawyers
Absolutely.
for being such a badass.
Yeah, no, she's fantastic. Ammon was less lucky in his counsel.
Wait, who did he have?
Oh, we'll get there.
Okay. But
So-
anyway, we're gonna pause and take a moment to recognize the absolute badassery of Lisa Ludwig.
You are amazing. We love you. On March 8th, a superseding indictment charged Bundy with conspiracy to impede the United States by force, possession of firearms and dangerous weapons in federal facilities, and using and carrying firearms in relation to a crime of violence. Bundy's attorney was Mike Arnold of the Arnold Law Group in Eugene.
No. I can't believe he won and he had Mike Arnold.
He didn't. You're jumping ahead.
Okay, sorry. Sorry.
So, The reason that he did not have Mike Arnold for trial was because Mr. Arnold was accused of organizing a social media harassment campaign against the public agencies involved in the prosecution and Oregon State Police. He also attempted to unduly influence the jury pool and faced an ethics complaint with the bar. But that complaint was dropped due to insufficient evidence.
For as much as I admire Lisa Ludwig, I have disdain for Mike Arnold.
I think I've only encountered him once, and it was on a family law case.
No, I had a friend that worked for his office, and that office was so horrible to her. And I don't want to share her story, but I have
fair
low opinions of him.
So this case is filed in court. He's been arraigned. The sovereign citizen movement then began inserting themselves with a flurry of filings that is referred to as paper terrorism. That is another thing we will get into next week. Bundy filed to dismiss the indictments on the basis that he thought the occupation would force a civil court to look at the constitutionality of the government's federal land management policy, despite SCOTUS history to the contrary. He believed this line of cases was wrongly decided, and that was his basis to do this, and therefore he didn't have criminal intent. The court obviously disagreed, and he fired Mr. Arnold shortly thereafter.
I mean, that was a smart choice.
So, the judge did ultimately dismiss one of the two firearms charges, finding that the underlying conspiracy charge does not meet the legal definition of a crime of violence. Prior to the trial starting, this is one of those really fun motions that they'll sometimes file. His attorney filed a motion to allow Bundy to wear cowboy attire in violation of U.S. Marshals policy disallowing adults in custody to wear ties, boots, belts for safety reasons. The judge denied the motion, saying that what Bundy was allowed to wear wouldn't prejudice him, and that he was, quote, dressed better than most people in the building, period.
Okay.
It's not like it's religious attire, right? Bundy and 8 co-defendants, including his brother, were set for trial on September 7th, and the other 9 were set for February 14th of the following year. Prior to trial, 11 co-defendants pled guilty, including 3 of the inner circle, 2 of which worked out a global resolution with the Nevada case. Because remember, the Nevada case is still pending at this point.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yes, that's the put a pin in it, and it's still pending. Bundy's attorney filed to limit the amount of testimony the government can utilize of how BLM staff felt threatened, because it was unclear that the testimony was connected with any of the 7 people on trial. Additionally, someone feeling threatened or in fear is not the same thing as someone's intent to intimidate them. Somebody can just be big and loud and not intending to intimidate anybody, but somebody may just be merely intimidated by the fact that that person is big and loud. Bundy's attorney also asked that the jury pool be pulled from the entire state rather than the Portland area. This allowed them to pull from a more conservative jury pool. So when you're in federal court, it's in the District of Oregon, but there are 3, there's one in Portland, one in Eugene, and I believe one in Medford, federal courthouses that are the district court for this District of Oregon. And generally, it will pull only from whatever counties are in that district, which in the Portland one is going to be like Multnomah, Washington, all those northern counties that tend to be very, very liberal. So in pulling from the entire state, so he could include the frontier counties and the rural counties, which tend to be more conservative, he wound up having a more conservative jury pool, which probably helped him in the end. He took the stand in his own defense, which is a choice. It is a choice that he's allowed to make. It is also a choice that he's allowed to not make and not have that be held against him.
And it's a choice that no attorney can stop you from doing, even if they think it's a stupid idea.
Yep. He testified for 3 days, which, like, I've had to testify before, and I testified for about 2.5 hours and literally got sick of it because my throat got raw.
It would be tough
3 days
to testify that long and kind of hold your grit.
Yeah. His testimony included talking about his and his father's and his brother's role in the 2014 case.
Oh my God, I bet his attorneys were ripping out their eyebrows.
Yeah. So generally, it's not a great idea to open yourself up to extra cross-examination and scrutiny about a case that is not the one that's in front of the court.
That's called an admission.
Because then you are recorded, and then they can just play that in the next hearing.
Yeah. Oh my God. his Nevada counsel was probably paying really close attention to this.
Oh, absolutely.
I regularly, so if I have clients that are subpoenaed into other hearings,
Mm-hmm.
I go and represent them in that hearing
Yep.
because I specifically do not want them doing that. That is the
Yep.
reason I put myself
Yep.
and do that pressure and put myself in that situation, because that's what you're trying to avoid. That exact
Exactly.
thing.
Exactly. Bundy also had an FBI informant testify for him. That individual testified that there were 9 occupiers that were actually other FBI informants. And so this allowed for an argument that you can't be part of a conspiracy against the government if the government is part of the conspiracy.
Sure.
That apparently swayed at least one juror. The defendants overall were largely arguing First and Second Amendment rights, that the defendants were engaging in civil disobedience and protest against the federal government's control over public lands. Prosecutors, on the other hand, were focused on the negative impact on the federal employees' ability to do their jobs. Bundy's trial attorney was Marcus Mumford,
Okay.
and he countered the state's argument by saying his problem wasn't with the employees, his problem was with their employer, the federal government. It won't respect its limits. He turned to the jury and said, "We're counting on you to stop government overreach. Our trust is in you." So trial, all told, lasted 6 weeks. And the jury deliberated for a total of 6 hours after the prior 3 days of deliberations were thrown out and they were directed to restart. So what happened there was that the jurors had sent in a couple questions, one asking the judge what to do if they came to a verdict on 3 of the defendants but not the others. And in a separate note, one juror indicated that juror number 11 was very biased due to their prior work for the Bureau of Land Management. It was unclear whether that bias made them biased for the government or against the government, but they had brought up in voir dire, in jury selection, that they had previously worked for the Bureau of Land Management and did the whole, like, yes, I can be impartial, I can put that aside, whatever they have to say to stay on the jury, right?
They bring in one of the alternates.
Yes, there's a little bit more to this. Judge Brown spoke to juror number 11 behind closed doors, because that's what she has to do in order to determine whether or not they're biased. And she found no basis to think that the person would be biased. And essentially, the defense lawyers filed a motion for mistrial unless the judge agreed to dismiss juror number 11 and restart deliberations. And so at that point, juror number 11 was replaced. And with the alternate, the jurors were directed to begin deliberations anew. And because of the motion for mistrial, the judge felt she had no other recourse but to replace juror number 11, because who wants to sit through a 6-week trial twice?
Nice. Oh my gosh.
While waiting for the verdict, there was a growing crowd of militants gathering outside, and also people who were curious about it. There were protesting, they were riding around on horses, there was a guy set up with a little, like, hibachi grill flipping burgers and hot dogs for everybody. It was just a grand old party outside the courthouse.
And so if this is at the Portland District Court, it's
Yes.
right downtown.
It is right downtown.
It is high rises.
Yeah, so it just in the middle of downtown, people riding on horses and dudes flipping burgers and protesters chanting and all sorts of stuff going on.
Honestly, probably did not even phase the Portlanders. They're used to this.
That is very true. There's a reason that they say Portland is weird. Ultimately, on October 27th, Bundy was found not guilty on all counts, which is great. That's the verdict that you want. But his attorney still threw a hissy fit. His attorney said that the acquittal was not enough and asked for Bundy to be released. The court denied the request because the charges from Nevada were still pending and he was going to get transferred from Oregon federal custody to Nevada state custody. His attorney got agitated and wound up in a shouting match with the judge over this release, ultimately getting himself tackled by the U.S. Marshals, and Judge Brown cleared the courtroom.
Did he get contempt? Did he get summary contempt?
It did not say. I would assume so if he got tackled by the U.S. Marshals.
I don't know. I'd love to see the summary contempt on that.
The overall theory of the loss is that the movement was leaderless. Like, while Bundy had kind of instigated stuff, as more and more and more militants showed up, it kind of took on a life of its own, which made the conspiracy charges harder to prove because there was no, like, leader.
Well, he would have to engage in some kind of affirmative action.
Correct. But at this point, like, it was spreading on social media, and other militants and sympathizers just started showing up without being invited. And so it just became this huge thing that he was no longer in control of. There obviously is concern that the victory would embolden militia groups in the country's ever tumultuous political climate. Oh, shocker. It did. But then he got transported to Nevada to get tried there.
And he's made these... I mean, the federal prosecutors in Nevada are just like hitting record. I'm just going to submit an expedited request for the trial audio. I'm going to have my transcriptionist, and we're just going to boop, boop, boop. I'm just going to read your quotes back to you.
Yep. Yeah, my summary of the 2014 case is a lot briefer just because it wasn't the main focus of my research. After he was acquitted in Portland, he was transported to Nevada. And when he was arraigned, this is like a King Dick move. He asked that the entire 64-page indictment be read aloud, which is absolutely his right. It is absolutely his right to have the indictment read aloud to him. But most people who can read, which it seems like he can if he's spreading shit on social media, will just be like, no, I'll read it to myself.
There's this standard thing that I say when I'm doing an initial appearance, which is I waive further reading and advice of rights.
Yep.
Because I've already at that point gone over the entire document with my client. Instead of making the judge read the entire indictment word for word, including the numbers.
Yep, including like caption and heretofore signed by the grand jury, blah, blah, blah. He also refused to enter a plea. That's doesn't seem as weird to me working in Marion County, where we frequently don't enter a plea at arraignment, because apparently there's some like urban lore that if you enter a not guilty plea, then the DAs won't give you an offer.
Oh,
there's a lot of things about Marion County that I find very strange, but
counties are so weird because I'm so used to, like, it would be difficult for me to be like, wait for the reading and advice of rights, enter denials at this time, ask for dates to be set in due course. That's so...
Yeah. No, we do not enter pleas at arraignment in Marion County. This is a thing that I inherited. I don't know. His attorney was, of course, lamenting the fact that the government had a practice run against his client, stating that they knew what worked and what didn't.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Because he testified about the whole fucking thing. Eventually, the case went to trial and was granted a mistrial with prejudice because the Bundys couldn't get a fair trial on the basis that the prosecution improperly withheld documents from the defense.
We just had one of these not too long ago in Benton County. It was an attempted murder. Dismissed with prejudice due to prosecutorial misconduct, and that prosecutor still works there.
Yeah, the quote is, "The court finds that the universal sense of justice has been violated." Of course, the federal prosecutors appealed, but the appellate court upheld the decision. The appellate court stopped short of calling it prosecutorial misconduct, but rather called it misjudgments made by the prosecution, which I think is cowardly. When you do not turn over documents that they may or may not have been exculpatory, we don't know because they weren't turned over, but failure to turn over especially exculpatory documents, but any documents to the defense, is a huge problem because it affects the right to a fair trial. It affects the defense's ability to properly prepare the defense if the documents are inculpatory, meaning they tend to prove guilt. It also extremely affects the ability to put on a defense when the documents are exculpatory, meaning it goes towards saying this person did not do this, and the prosecution is withholding these documents, knowing that they exist, knowing that this isn't the guy, and they're plowing forwards anyways. That's why prosecutorial misconduct gets brought up.
We're especially talking about Ammon Bundy, but Ammon Bundy, Cliven Bundy, and Ryan Bundy, while not being heroes to me, never killed anybody, never threatened to kill anybody, didn't inflict...
And in fact, one of their people got killed by police.
Yeah, never inflicted any physical violence on anyone.
Except a dog.
Except a dog. I mean, that's a bad look, kicking a dog that isn't actively biting you. And some of them had some really good lawyers and some really good defense, and when the prosecution screws up, it really opens doors for you.
It really does.
I did look this up, like a little update on this. Ammon Bundy has been convicted of a handful of misdemeanors in like state
Mm-hmm.
court sense, but he's never really regained the prominence that he had during the Malheur standoff.
Yeah, that was kind of like his 15 minutes,
Yeah.
and then he just kind of fell off into obscurity amongst all the other militants.
I'm thinking about, though, the people of Burns and the ranchers in that area who, like, they didn't want these people to be there.
Nope.
These were out of towners. This is a
Yep.
very small, tight knit community that produces a huge amount of our agricultural product.
Absolutely.
And so I feel, if anything, I feel really bad for them
Mm-hmm.
during all the trouble that was caused
Yeah.
for them. A small group of people trying to just genuinely live in their
Just live their
town.
life and do their farming and do their, yeah.
Yeah, do their ranching, take care of their own cattle, not breaking federal laws. People who are having BLM leases, because it's not hard and it's regular that, these long-term BLM leases for grazing. I feel bad for the people that had to clean up the wildlife refuge.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yeah,
feel,
they made a mess of it.
yeah, and I feel really bad for that community. Like, hey, we're a very small town. We're trying to raise some cattle, raise some families, go to school. People who couldn't go to Safeway that, the days, because they're what is happening?
There's like
at my
300 people in this little tiny Safeway parking lot.
I need milk.
Yeah. No, like I think it's like the one thing. There's like a Safeway and a McDonald's, and that's it.
It's, yeah.
And it's a really small, like you think about Safeway parking lots in big cities. No,
Yeah.
it's a small little, like maybe 20 spaces. Like it's not big.
I'm thinking about my hometown that was nearest the farm where I grew up, which is Colfax, Washington. There's a Rosars there, which is a grocery store. I'm thinking about the Rosars parking lot, and I'm also thinking about, like, my brother trying to get groceries for his kids, and it's full of insurgents, and he's like, what is happening?
Yeah. Yeah, no, they were not wanted. The sheriff did in fact speak for the people when Ammon said, no, you're not speaking for the people, or I don't believe you. And well, in fact, the sheriff was, because the people did not want them there.
Yeah, the people did not want them there. The Hammonds did not want them there.
The Hammonds didn't want their help. The Hammonds had their appeal. The appeals court said what they said. They got resentenced, and they were like, cool, we'll do our prison time.
Well, that takes us on to, I guess, kind of the opposite end of the Bundy spectrum, talking about notorious serial killer Ted Bundy.
So creepy.
I'm citing my sources first, which I'm going to just proform.
Yeah,
So
no, my sources were a whole bunch of news articles from various news outlets.
I
And Wikipedia.
the Netflix docu-series Conversations with the Killer, the 10 Bundy tapes,
That was so good.
the Max, what's on right now, Max documentary Crazy Not Insane, the article Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile Minds, Insanity and Competency in Courts by Sarah Saksawi. I'm so sorry. This is a student, but there's a lot of great resources. And A Fool for a Client, Print Portrayals of 49 Pro Se Criminal Defendants by Douglas Mossman, MD, and Neil W. Dunseith Jr., MD. So we're not going to really go into the crimes of Ted Bundy. He was born in 1946 and executed in Florida in 1989. He was only convicted of 3 murders. There are 20 confirmed murders. He confessed to 30 and is suspected of committing 36 murders. We're just analyzing his defense because he is known in his criminal cases for having represented himself, which is called a pro se defense, where somebody...
And yeah, and if anybody's ever heard the man who represents himself has a fool for a client, the reason that you're entitled to court-appointed attorney if you cannot afford one is, aside from the fact that pro se litigants, people who are representing themselves, are not necessarily educated on the law in the way that attorneys are in both straight up education, like law school, and years of practice, but also you don't have that emotional separation from the story the way that an attorney will, and it can blind you to some holes in your case and things like that.
Absolutely. What I was thinking about was this idea of being pro se, where I'm going to a fool for a client. This that article analyzed 571 articles about defendants representing themselves. And it covers 87 cases with 267 total counts that they're analyzing. And of those, there's 17 homicide charges. Of the cases that went to trial or didn't settle, there was 39 where they're found guilty on all counts. 4 acquitted on all charges. On 3 of the cases, the charges were dismissed. And on 5 of the cases, the defendant was found guilty of lesser charges. There was 2 hung juries. And what I thought was interesting was there was 1 not guilty by reason of insanity with a pro se defendant.
That's wild. He probably got up on the stand and they went,
Yeah, we don't think you're doing okay. Something that stood out to me about this article is why people represent themselves. Mm-hmm. And they had a list of some of the primary reasons when the reasons could be ascertained because they're doing a print review. So the highest one is people were not satisfied with a lawyer's performance or a prior lawyer's performance.
That's what I hear quite a bit at arraignments when people are asking to represent themselves, yeah.
Principled political positions or views. We might be talking about sovereign citizens there. Mm-hmm. Strategic reasons, people who believed lawyers were part of a conspiracy, a generally low opinion of lawyers, objecting to an attorney raising an insanity plea. A few didn't want charges to be contested, and apparently the lawyers did. There's a few people that sadly they could not afford another lawyer. That was only a few. And there was one that was reported as pursuing litigation was defendant's hobby.
There are people who do that. There are like jailhouse lawyers, people who have been in the system for a very long time. Sometimes the jailhouse lawyers can be very helpful. A lot of the time there is a lack of like nuance. They can read the cases, they can analyze the cases. They don't know how to read them the way a lawyer would read them, and therefore they're not applying them properly.
I wanted to take a moment to recognize and examine that this is a phenomenon. I have never personally had a client that went on to represent themselves. I have been replaced as counsel a handful of times, but I've been a part of cases where people wanted to represent themselves for whatever reason. Most of the time when a defendant or a youth or even a parent in a dependency case wants to represent themselves, the judge does a colloquy, which is a conversation with the person making that request to determine whether or not that's legitimate, whether they can or not.
Yeah, and the judges will do that at arraignments when somebody wants to represent themselves. And generally they'll preface it with, we're not trying to embarrass anybody, but, you know, what was the highest grade you completed? What kind of resources do you have? Have you studied the law? To sort of grok where they're at and also kind of show them that they don't actually know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
To try to be like, but you get a free attorney, like maybe you should do this.
Most of the time, just from, this is not like any kind of scientific examination, judges either talk the defendant out of it or they'll find a reason to say, no, I'm not going to allow you to represent yourself. I've been on the other side of a handful of cases where somebody's been representing themselves, and I respect that it is their right to do so. Now, Ted Bundy was a law student. He was first a law student at the University of Puget Sound, and then when things started heating up for him, he went out to Utah and became a law student in Utah. So he was educated.
He was also like Mensa smart.
I never saw any indication. Like, there's this.
I thought they said that in the movie.
There's this really like long rumor that this person is a genius, that he's an actual genius. We don't see evidence of that. He is pretty well organized, but not even an exceptionally organized serial killer. But we're living in a time where jurisdictions are not communicating with each other. He's able to move. He is also not poor. He's a white man, and he is a younger white man. He doesn't look creepy. There's a lot of reports like, oh, this guy's really good looking. I think he looks like a pencil, but...
He was very charming.
He was very charming, and so he just wasn't caught on to. You see from the actual evidence that once people like really first catch him, then they catch on to him really quickly. Everything snowballs for Bundy very fast. That first happens in 1975 in Utah, where Ted Bundy attempts to kidnap a woman named Carol Duranch.
Mm-hmm.
And she escapes. So he's pretending to be a police officer. She is suspicious of him. She goes a little bit along with it, but not to the point where he's able to kidnap and then later murder her. So she's able to escape from him. And this is the first trial that he undergoes. And Carol Duranch, I would say if there's any hero of the story, it's her, because she's very adamant. She's a strong self-advocate. She escapes from him, and she's able to clearly identify him. So he's been pulled over on a traffic offense, and they find a bunch of suspicious things in his car, and they suspect, based on her descriptions, like, hey, this is the guy that attempted to kidnap you. And she's able to successfully identify him. So he goes on trial. Here he has an attorney in Utah, and he keeps the attorney the whole time. He has a bench trial, and
meaning he doesn't have a jury.
There's no jury. So he's on the advice of counsel. He does the trial to the judge. And there's not a lot of reports about him interfering or trying to kind of take over his defense. The thing that's notable about this is he bursts out during the victim's testimony, calling her a liar. And by Bundy's own words, says that, that made the jury think that he was capable of these violent outbursts. And he winds up being convicted of the kidnapping in Utah.
Well,
Colorado.
When you burst out violently, verbally at the victim while they're testifying, I'm not surprised the judge came out the way they did.
Colorado has keyed on to him, and Colorado tries to pin a first-degree murder charge on him. He waives extradition and is transported to Colorado after his conviction in Utah. He escapes. So at a preliminary hearing, he is representing himself, and he's able to advocate for himself enough to get unshackled. And he hops out a window at the courthouse. He's gone about a week. He then escapes a second time in Colorado. And the thing here, we're going to talk about dumb defenses, is he has a lawyer at this point between the first and second escape. And the case in Colorado is falling apart against him. His lawyer is doing a bang-up job at getting evidence thrown out and challenging a lot of things. And he's advised, you are likely to be acquitted, but he still starves himself down to 140 pounds, and he's a taller person, escapes through a ceiling vent into a jailer's apartment, and ultimately escapes. Then he is gone for a while. He first goes, by his own confession, he goes to Michigan, and then he goes to Florida. And when asked why he goes to Florida, it's because it's the farthest away from the Pacific Northwest that he could get, because the heat's on him in Florida.
Yeah.
In Florida, we have the Chi Omega murder and assaults, which gave him the nickname the Co-Ed Killer, and the murder of a child, Kimberly Leach. He is once again busted in a traffic stop, tries to present false ID, won't say who he is. They key onto him there, and he eventually goes on trial in Florida, first for the Chi Omega murders and assaults. And that is his real first, genuine murder trial. He has a total of 5 public defense attorneys appointed to him. And
over the course of everything?
Yeah, but 4 at a time.
See that much? I mean, I can see how he could be that much of a handful, but
he is that much of a handful. In interviews, his public defense counsel has varying degrees of feeling like they're ready. This is a very high publicity crime. The Chi Omega murders were really brutal. 2 young women were killed. 2 young women were brutally assaulted.
Brutally assaulted, yeah.
Brutally assaulted in the span of about 15 minutes. And this trial is where the dumb defense really gets into play. So Ted Bundy is like taking charge of his own defense. And he's not letting his lawyers, or they're allowing him to do a lot of things. From what I heard is like, this is a nightmare client. This is the nightmariest of nightmare clients. And
I mean,
but
we've both had our fair share of nightmare clients.
yeah, but he's worse than anything.
Yeah.
And he winds up doing depositions, cross-examining, doing questioning, and presenting evidence himself. You see this biting him because he cross-examines the first witness, who is the responding officer to the Chi Omega house after the murders and assaults. And he makes this guy tell and retell what he witnessed when he gets to the sorority house. It appeared to the jury that he was relishing and listening to the retelling. When his
because he's a sociopath.
When his lawyers are able to do their job, they do an exceptionally good job cross-examining a witness who claimed that she saw Bundy entering Chi Omega. And the thing that really screws him is the examination and evidence presented by a forensic odontologist, like a teeth mark examiner, about bite marks. Now, forensic odontologist...
Pause. That has recently been found to be junk science.
It's not even that recent. It's been known to be junk science for quite a long time, and you can't really present it where we are. And I don't think I've ever been presented with bite marks as evidence, but it's completely junk science. But to the jury, it establishes that the bite marks found definitively belong to Ted Bundy. The prosecutor says in his closing remarks, he, meaning Ted Bundy, thinks he is smart enough to get away with any crime. And if you're seeing like what he's doing and how he's presenting and how he's trying to charm the jury and charm the judge, in just what I saw, some of how the judge was treating Ted Bundy, I would have moved for a mistrial over and over and over again. That's not happening. He's found guilty on all charges.
Yeah.
The jury deliberated for fewer than 7 hours, and he was ultimately sentenced.
For that many charges is really fast.
Well, and for 2 charges of first-degree murder, and so 2 charges of attempted murder, burglary. I mean, it's a very short deliberation period, especially when they're examining hundreds of pieces of evidence and testimony. Now, today, we would have things like DNA that would get him, but if, let's say, all things are equal, if this case was presented today and there was no DNA evidence, the charges against him for that murder at the sorority house are eminently winnable. I'm going to say if he hadn't later confessed, that I think today we could be debating, did he actually commit those murders or not?
Right. So the issue with stuff like forensic odontology, ballistics is now coming under great scrutiny in Oregon. Essentially, the field of forensic is narrowing quite a bit because the number of points that are used to identify like a fingerprint or a firearm match or like a boot print or whatever is very small compared to the number of available points. So like a fingerprint, they only need like 14 points to make a match, but there are 107, I think, different loci on your fingerprint where there could be a match. It's actually a similar issue with DNA. When the state is offering DNA evidence and they say 1 out of however many millions of things this person is ruled in, there's a series of questions you can ask about, well, how did you tell the computer to do the math? Because if you put in just the one person, the computer's going to either rule that person in or rule that person out. But if you put like 2 or 3 people in the computer, then 2 people could be ruled in. Right.
So, I mean, if we're thinking about like an older type of forensic analysis, blood type analysis, where you could say that somebody was out of a group, but you couldn't definitively say that the person was the person who did it, that we're finding that a lot more things are akin to a blood type analysis, saying you can definitively eliminate someone, but you cannot definitively include someone. Like this is the individual. So things like some types of fingerprint reconstruction, junk science, forensic odontology, junk science, being able to say that ballistics,
this gun fired this bullet.
This exact gun must have fired this bullet is junk science. And things like CSI lead people to believe like, oh, if there's science involved, that it must be true. But like fiber analysis is another one where you could say that, yeah, this fiber belongs to this certain group of fibers, but you can't say, oh, this fiber absolutely came from this car rug. There's no way.
Yeah.
And there's an idea that, oh, we're going to get down to it. The eyewitness testimony against him was very weak, and the forensic odontology is junk. And had he not later confessed to these murders, if we were still talking about him at all, which I don't think we would be,
Right.
absent his confession, I think there would be a very viable debate about, did he commit these murders at all? Now let's talk about the murder trial of Kimberly Leach, who's a child. And here he decides he's going to be pro se. He's acting fully as his own lawyer. The prosecutor in that case...
Because that went so well for him last time.
Yeah, before he had lawyers trying to advise him and trying to harangue him, and he's going all over the place.
Failing.
And failing. He is his own lawyer. The prosecutor calls him arrogant, says he's behaving very arrogantly. He's just got this belief that he's going to be successful. And his lawyers, when interviewed later, talked about when he was convicted of the Chi Omega murders, that he was just shocked. He could not believe that eventuality would possibly happen. He had a plea deal on the table prior to the trial that would have kept him away from the death penalty, and he just turned it down and just had not meaningfully considered that he could be convicted.
You know, it's absolutely your client's choice whether or not they take a plea or go to trial. And if they want to walk face first into the buzzsaw, it is your job as the defense attorney to hold their hand and do your best.
And his counsel was #doing their best.
Yep.
The Kimberly Leach murder, the prosecutor was later interviewed. It was like, hey, why did you do this at all? Because he was already sentenced to death. And it was basically because this is a child. She individually deserves justice, and having 2 death penalty...
It's more likely that one of them's going to stick on appeal.
Yeah, because we know the death penalty is going to go up on appeal. He calls one witness, a character witness...
Which, like, sidebar, isn't generally allowed unless, like, very specific circumstances.
Yeah, but that's not the weirdest thing that happened. He uses a very obscure Florida law.
Of course he does.
To have an impromptu wedding with his character witness during his own trial, during his direct examination.
There's a law about that?
Yes. By them declaring their intent to be married in a specific way, they wind up getting married during his trial, in his actual murder trial, during his direct examination of her.
So he just wants all the attention on him.
This
like,
person
that is 100% narcissist for you.
In Kimberly Leach's murder trial, there's a lot better evidence against him. There is really good eyewitness, and eyewitnesses are very faulty, but there's really good evidence against him. And he is found guilty. Whereupon he has an outburst at the jury, and he's screaming and ranting and raving.
With no attorney to stop him.
Only law enforcement restraining him. He later tries to avoid execution. He's got an appeal. He gets a lawyer to try and stay his execution on the basis that he didn't have competent counsel. And here she is going along with it because he was his own counsel, so she's arguing that he's not competent.
I mean, yeah.
And there is some evidence that came out. This Crazy Not Insane documentary talks more about like his mental state, and he was diagnosed with what today is known as bipolar disorder, that he was not able to effectively aid and assist in his own defense in the Chi Omega trial, and was just kind of allowed to take over, and he wasn't competent to do that, and then he wasn't competent to act as his own lawyer during the Kimberly Leach murder trial. This lawyer wins him 2 stays, and then against advice of counsel, after his last stay is denied, and in an attempt to stay his execution further, because he thinks he's got this ace up his sleeve, that if I start confessing to murders that I have not been convicted of, that they're not going to execute me. He confesses to...
Because they want to take him to trial on those?
Yeah, or that they're going to want to know where the bodies are. It's unclear what his actual reasoning is. He confesses to approximately 30 murders. He's suspected of committing 36, and it was found that he was credible, that 20 of the murders that he confessed to, that they could find a definitive link that he had committed them. The Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile Minds article, which is a student article, but it references a study by the University of Kentucky inviting psychologists to diagnose Ted Bundy, just based on documents. Out of the 73 certified
psychologist ethics rules don't generally let you diagnose somebody without actually doing a face-to-face with them.
Yeah, but this is a hypothetical.
But this is a hypothetical.
He's dead. Out of the 73 certified psychologists who took part in the study, 96, which I'm assuming there was just one hanger on that said no, diagnosed him with antisocial personality disorder, and 80% of them believed he was a prototypical example of the illness. So the state psychologist, when he appealed and he's trying to avoid the death penalty, talking about was he competent to stand trial, could he aid and assist, that psychologist had some incredible points. You know, he was able to fire one of his lawyers. He was able to be organized, put things together, make rational decisions as to why he could have antisocial personality disorder. He might even be bipolar, but that he wasn't legally incompetent.
Trying to fire your lawyer, I don't think is a good checkbox on that list, just because I've seen so many people who are wildly unfit and psychotic try to fire their lawyers because they don't want to go to the state hospital.
No, it was the reasoning behind him firing his lawyer. It wasn't that he fired him, is that, you know, this person needs to be replaced because they don't believe in me and they're undermining my defense. I'm also profoundly against the death penalty, ethically speaking, but this person really put her money where her mouth was, and she was arguing that Ted Bundy should not be executed.
Well, yeah. The death penalty has its own ethical and moral issues that we could probably discuss in a later episode.
Yeah.
But
if we're just talking about his defense of himself, you see at every trial how he was thinking, like, I am so charming, I am so handsome, and that I've gotten away with so much, that he could not in his mind contemplate not being successful.
Yeah, he'd worked up the picture of himself so much in his mind that he was no longer in contact with consensus reality.
I don't know if we can even say that he was completely out of contact with consensus reality, because he understood, like, this trial is happening, this is what is at stake, but he couldn't
consensus reality
think about losing.
Right, so consensus reality in terms of, like, what the consensus view of the world is, right?
Yeah.
Not like this trial is happening versus I'm sitting next to a dragon, but how he perceives himself versus how everybody else perceives him and what happened. That's what I mean.
Especially in the Kimberly Lee trial, he didn't even really present a defense. It's just, I'm a good guy, I couldn't have done this. And then getting married in the middle of trial, people opined that he thought that jurors would not convict him on the day of his wedding.
Yeah.
Which is pretty wild. There is an ongoing debate among psychologists to today about whether or not he was able to aid and assist in his own defense or was competent to stand trial, which are different things.
Well, aid and assist is part of it. So competent to stand trial involves understanding the moving parts of the legal system, which he seems to have. It also involves understanding the charges against you, which he probably understands. And then it involves ability to cooperate with counsel and assist in your defense.
I'm trying to say that he couldn't assist his counsel in the preparation or presentation of a defense, and that his incompetency lie in the fact that he could not meaningfully contemplate or understand losing trial.
Right. And dovetailing into the diagnostic criteria for antisocial personality disorder is failure to conform to laws and social norms, deceitfulness, impulsivity or failure to plan ahead, irritability and aggressiveness, reckless disregard for the safety of self or others, consistent irresponsibility, and lack of remorse. And
he demonstrated a huge lack of remorse.
He hits all damn widgets.
To think about, like, some people have diagnosed him with psychopathy, which is antisocial personality disorder.
Antisocial personality disorder used to be called being a psychopath. So this is just the modern version of that.
People think of antisocial personality disorder as being the scariest of the diagnoses, in my experience. Like,
It can be. It just depends on how the person interacts with the world because of it.
no, I'm
right?
saying like
Because
there's a perception.
oh,
Like the common perception is that people with antisocial personality disorder are inherently dangerous.
yes.
And I think it's about like 1% of people could be diagnosed with ASPD and never ever commit a single crime.
Right. The concern that makes people scared of this psychological presentation is the lack of remorse, is the glibness, is the fact that they are able to almost study human behavior so they can become this hugely charming and seemingly warm person only to be completely cold and calculating the entire time.
Except we often see ASPD presented in people who might have cognitive deficits, so they're not able to be particularly charming. It's more diagnosed in men.
It is.
Yes, so it's far more diagnosed in men because of socialization and emotional presentation, whereas
And
women are borderline personality disorder.
Right. And there's some crossover between the two, but borderline personality disorder, like we talked about last week or maybe 2 weeks ago, it's much more cross-diagnosed with bipolar disorder because of the mood swings associated with it. You have less of that with antisocial personality disorder.
My point is still to say you shouldn't be scared of someone because of their diagnosis.
Right. Absolutely.
There is not a mental health diagnosis that just because of that diagnosis, you should be afraid of them.
Right.
There are presentations of autism where it seems like they don't have remorse or they're emotionally very glib, and those people are not. They're being judged based on presentation rather than internal processes.
Yep. Autism spectrum disorder, you and I are both diagnosed with it, is weird in the sense that people with autism tend to feel very deeply, but emote very little.
And we had to learn how to emote how other people understand us.
Yep.
So I think a soapbox we can both stand on is don't judge someone based on a diagnosis.
Exactly.
A diagnosis is only helpful medical information to treatment providers, to individuals themselves, because everything's a spectrum now.
Right.
The presentation of any particular diagnosis could be more different between two people of the same diagnosis than it would be from two people who have different diagnoses.
Right.
It does not mean that they are inherently evil, that they are going to commit a crime, that they are going to be a violent person at all. Even people with a scary sounding diagnosis like antisocial personality disorder, most of those people will never, like most people in the United States, will never commit a crime.
Right. Exactly. Even as many people as are criminalized in the United States for simply being who they are.
Yes.
And in the situation that they are in. But that's another episode.
So next, we're going to talk about, we could even debate back and forth about a delusion, but we're going to talk about a real false belief, a set of persistent false beliefs about the justice system that is in a lot of countries, is in Canada, Australia, the United States.
Yep. So next week we are talking about sovereign citizens, also known as constitutionalists, but don't tell them that. That's a big deep dive that we're going to be doing. I'm a little worried about what my targeted ads are going to look like after I do this research, but it'll be an interesting talk.
We're going to talk about how they're interacting with the justice system, how these people are being victimized, even with this persistent false belief, and where this type of defense stands today.
Yep. As always, like, review, share so that we can keep this podcast growing. Any questions, thoughts, concerns, email us at dumbdefensespodcast@gmail.com, and we will see you next week.
Hi, Mom.